everybody. We are now 43 participants. That's quite interesting, and I'm very happy to lead you a little bit through the webinar today. As Stefan already pointed out, we're talking about eHealth, we're talking about competence centers, and that's the role of the so-called ELOs, who are responsible to run and develop and, of course, bring into the future the eHealth activities in each country. And we are a group who are quite well busy these days, everyone in his own country, trying to foster eHealth and, of course, data leverage. But besides using data in healthcare, of course, it's hopefully used later on in research and development. And we're talking about the overall complex topic eHealth a little bit more in detail, looking into the different projects they are running now. Looking at the first slide, thank you, Stefan. We're talking about the use of data coming from the care processes, and of course from other sources where health data is processed, to allow better use of this data in a big data and artificial intelligent environment. And of course, we really do influencing the politicians and politics that come over to nowadays establish rules and procedures how to reuse that. And of course, these governance principles are not only national, they are European, and therefore we're talking about the European aspects on many levels, and therefore this group was very active for a long time for that. I'm the co-chair of the group together with VESA, and we are leading you through the webinar today, giving you hopefully some insights and expecting a lot of questions and an interactive session at the second half of this meeting. And yeah, let me just show the agenda a little bit in detail. We're starting with my welcome, and I certainly switch over to VESA for some minutes, then giving back the voice to Stefan, a little bit wrapping up the last session, which we had, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago. Then handing over to Istvan, giving it insight into the eHealth action, what's happening there, and why the eHealth network are relevant for all of that. We're looking into the INTEROPEHRATE project, quite a long time, 20 minutes also, hoping to get some insight what's happening there. And of course, we are giving the EHDS a flashlight, what's happening in health data spaces, organizations. And later on, my good friend Henrik will give you and give us the chance to interactively ask questions and get answers from us, from all the audience, not only from the speakers, but of course they are dedicated to answer them first. And at the end, VESA will hopefully get a good conclusion to wrap up the meeting and give some insights to the next. So, and this is my starting point to point over and to give the floor to VESA.
Yes, I also welcome everybody to this interesting webinar, and especially about architecture and processes for enabling data reuse. Here is shown a Finnish rather innovative solution based on legislation, where we actually have one data permit authority, what we call FinData here, and it has powers over many institutions here in Finland, so that it can gather and deliver data on due time, including also the national Kanta services, as you know, are rather integrated, centralized, and shared services where, for example, customers or patients can look up on their own health data and prescription data in My Kanta services. We also have a plethora of national registries here in Finland, numbering something like 30 nowadays, and quality registers are coming, also something like 7 at the moment. I heartily welcome everybody to discuss and interact upon these issues, and perhaps I should give the floor to Stefan again.
Yes, thank you very much, Besa. And this already, in a way, started to report a little bit from the last meeting, since we spoke also on the Finnish situation a little bit last time. So let me now conclude with some further lessons learned from our first ELO webinar held on the 20th of May. And we were really honored to welcome Dr. Carrie Thompson from DG Connect, who gave a comprehensive presentation to us, and you can see a full recording of this webinar by visiting our website. And she was explaining why the domain is now really becoming so important with an increase in digital health services, and the need now to build new infrastructures and find appropriate data sharing models. And actually, appropriate data sharing models, this will be in focus for today. But just to wrap up a little bit what has been said, Carrie presented the European Strategy for Data, which has identified 6 barriers that you find here on the screen: not enough data available for reuse, no real user empowerment, skill shortages, fragmentation of the single market, lack of European data processing and storage solutions, and again, the theme of more of today, absence of comprehensive data governance approaches. And she also briefly explained to us the overall model of the European health data space, serving better healthcare, better policy making, and better research and innovation. And you see here the 3 pillars of the European health data space. From the right, infrastructure, quality of data, and again, governance. Then the European Commission had launched an invitation already a while ago, and it closed at the end of May. Having this audience of the ELOs, we debated elements of the strategy and also launched a follow-up survey. And we could conclude this exercise by both feeding an EHTEL position into the public consultation, and also we submitted 2 annexes that provided some insights beyond the scope of the consultation, which has been a bit limited on the technical domain. And just a very brief synthesis. So health and care have to be appropriately accommodated in the implementation of the European strategy. Then with the group, we identified key purposes in health and care, and also reflected in particular on deploying cloud infrastructures as far it relates to health providers. And we also could then submit a second annex, since EHTEL functions as a health sector ambassador in the European Open DEI project. And here also an internal survey had been launched, had been synthesized by our colleague Luc Nicolas, and we plan to publish both annexes in due time, so that you can read this. Just then to let's say, to lead over to this case, today's discussions. So health data need to be more open to every stakeholder. Trust needs to be assured, and in the survey we received a proposal to have a pan-European patient consent. And last but not least, EU-wide interoperability is needed to leverage the full benefits of health data reuse. So we will revisit the element of the consent, and but now we move on. That was on the last meeting. We had a guest from the International Data Spaces Association, IDSA, Sven Meister, which is very active in the OpenDEI project. And Sven Meister compared data to the new blood. And he emphasized health data sovereignty and how important it is to have decentralized medical data spaces. And you see here in the picture just one example of a cross-sectorial approach, and more on this you will find in the Annex 2 paper that I've mentioned before. So with this, I give back to Andreas just to welcome the next speaker.
I will just hand over now directly to Istvan, who will give us a detailed insight about what's happening in the eHealth network and the supporting project organization, eHealth Action, where nearly all member states have representative in, and of course Gematik is part of that, and other competence centers are part of that. So Istvan, hope you can make it. There's a lot of content to talk about. You can make it in this 20 minutes we have. Feel free to use them. It's your floor.
Thank you. So let me introduce my colleague Márton Kis as well from Semmelweis University, and myself, István Csizmadia from National Healthcare Service Center, both from Hungary. Today we would like to speak about the eHealth network proceedings for governance principles of reuse of health data. Well, just some words about the e-action, then what we had last week, some events, so reflect on some learnings of the events, and well, as a result, we managed to begin fine-tuning our principles as main deliverables of our work, and a short wrap-up. Next slide, please. Yes, next slide. E-action is a joint action supporting the eHealth network to implement the ongoing multi-annual work program, which has four main priority areas: empowering people, enhancing continuity of care, overcoming implementation challenges, and our work package deals with innovative use of health data. Priority area B would deliver finally common principles to facilitate the development of innovative use of health data projects at European level. Next slide, please. Our work hopefully will contribute also to the oncoming activities this year and next years, to produce code of conduct, for example, to iron out differences in GDPR, or start new joint action on European health data space. Next slide, please. What is quite important to emphasize today, that our focus is fairly wide. It was in the previous slide, that we are dealing not only with research, but we are providing our principles in the domain of for example, public health and the different use cases in quality assurance. For example, supporting institution management or system governance, or improving patient care by assisted decision making and other tools, reducing the readmission rate, and so on and so on. Next slide, please. We traced what is behind the different challenges. In the last ELO program, we were introduced the different problems facing our work, and we found that lack of trust, legal uncertainties, and lack of funding and financial resources could be named as root causes. And this is what we would like to eliminate or mitigate with our principles. Next slide, and the next slide, please. So we had a bit more than 100 principles, and the majority of the participants represented member state public bodies, but approximately 22% came from EC or agencies, or different international organizations representing patients or industry and other professional organizations. We had a lot of pitches during our 6 sessions in the 3 days. Next slide, please. So we had originally 12 principles, and we asked during the registration of our events last week to rate them, how important registering people find them. So the names in the long format represents how they were introduced originally, and then in the end of our sessions last week, we also asked another rating. These shorter versions were used in the rating after our sessions last week. So we worked a lot during the meetings to try to fine-tune them as well. Next slide, please. In the next slide, you will find the results in the end of our meetings, where it was quite interesting that 4 principles were found interesting by more than half of the participants in the voting. So speak the same language, create code of conduct, involve stakeholders, and foster data reuse were the most important according to this questionnaire. Next slide, please. We managed to listen to 19 pitches. We listed a lot of learnings in the next 3 slides. Unfortunately, we have a short time, and going through the learnings of the pitches, it would need a lot of time. So practically, we ask INTEROPEHRATE to share our slides, and participants could find these learnings. This is a short collection, and of course, we are to share our slides and also the pitches in the eAction homepage. More details could be found. We also learned a lot during the discussion in breakout rooms. Let me emphasize at least one: assess needs for and possibilities of the use of anonymized and pseudonymized data, especially in big data. It is often useless. It's quite interesting. And also let me emphasize another one: establish a common data model and facilitate the tools to deploy federated networks of analysis where data stays where it is generated in the custody of their owners, and knowledge of analysis are provided in a rigorous, auditable, and predictable way. And if I may remember that there were a long discussion, I think in almost all the breakout rooms that we had about the ownership, because GDPR doesn't define what the ownership is. It speaks a lot and very useful, provides very useful rules for data subjects and controllers. Next slide, please. Because now we can turn to what is the result of the discussions. Next slide, please. But first, let me reflect again to the problems listed by the EU data strategy. and also the use cases. On that slide, the previous slide, we tried just to list, so there is no direct connection to, let's say, use case 1 and 2 to problem 1. Both columns contain only lists of the current issue. If we gather the use cases, you can see the next slide, the domains, what we decide to use as a group of different domains of the different use cases. There are 5 domains: policy and governance, education and training, legal, ethical and regulatory issues, interoperability and technical standards, dissemination and stakeholder involvement. And if the different use cases faces challenges, problems caused by the root causes, then the principles that we offer should target on these root causes. Next slide, please, where you can see that we grouped our principles in 3 lots, following or accordingly to the root causes. So dealing with trust issues, lack of resources, and the rules and habits under the issue of legal uncertainties. Next slide, you can find the first lot, where we focus on the increase of trust. And let me start with the force in this picture in right hand down, where this new or newly formulated principle says about do everything possible to reduce the risk and avoid attacks and misuse or abuse. This is one part of a formal principle 3. The other part went to the other lot dealing with the resources. So here you can also find another principle, a bit reworded, identify and involve stakeholders in the reuse of data and creating value. Shortly, just involve, but the identification is very important again as well. Another one, identify, communicate, and disseminate socially acceptable purpose to reuse data, and communicate in a socially acceptable and timely manner to the purpose to reuse data, where dissemination is very important, because we should not only tell what we know about the socially acceptable purposes, but we have to also educate people to teach about these important things. And finally, with the picture of one of our famous historians from the 13th century called Anonymous, the statue shows without face. And it's quite interesting if we can work with anonymized or pseudonymized data, if national laws allow, for the purpose of secondary use of data and big data. During one of the breakout room works, there was another principle offered on the basis of that one, saying countries shall aim to have health-related data in machine-readable format. But considering that another principle dealing with things related to this issue is in the next lot, and now we can go to the next slide, please. We can say that this new one could be integrated here in the principle, or switch to the principle in the right hand down, use existing technical standards, a bit more detailed. We can use existing technical standards and avoid evolution of new ones when not justified. It's very important because in certain cases it is really justified to have new ones. But generally this principle is talking about finding those which could be really good for us. Just an example, SNOMED, for example. Yeah, another one where we integrated the former principle 4 and the new one, let's name it 13, address the right decision makers, users and beneficiaries of the model for open data and data sharing to foster data reuse, plus include data to support the decision-making process. This is also important in principle 7, here in the left-hand down. Learn and systematically integrate current, emerging and future stakeholder needs. If we speak about emerging and future needs, perhaps we should forecast, and here is quite important that decision makers should also use data, big data, to predict certain needs. And finally, in this slot, which is about the increasing efficiency of using funds and financial resources, the following one, curricula of health professionals, and this is a new part of this principle, and healthcare managers and other stakeholders should be adopted to include digital health literacy, e-skills or e-ability, plus big data. And what is also important here is that teaching should be started as early as possible, maybe in the mid-school or secondary school level. Next slide, please. Yeah, and finally, we have the rules, habits, so the legal questions, so where we should create international terms or alignments of data control, perhaps ownership, and so on. So this is about the code of conduct. We should speak the same language, maybe also vocabulary and metadata is involved in this. Have to have a win-win situation for all stakeholders. So stakeholders should understand each other. This is quite important. This is one of the parts of the conclusion in our work up to now, that we should take into consideration and somehow align and be operable with our principles, with the principle of different case stakeholder groups, because it's quite important, for example, that data saves life is providing interesting issues for us as well. And finally, we reworded completely our last one. And I think I can say thank you for your attention.
I have seen a lot of questions, but first of all, thank you, Istvan, for giving us the insight into the work package 5 activities of the EHDS action. There are a lot of questions concerning your presentations. Some of them go into the what is data ownership direction, and some of them are assuming that the EHDS action will do something with that. Not sure where to start with, but maybe you mentioned that concerning the EHDS action, which is more or less finishing in the next year, is only the activity to collect all that. What do you think, how that will continue, what comes out of work package 5 and the EHDS action concerning the EHDS network?
I think it's interesting if we manage to finish our work in May. We will get to a stage, I mean next May, we will get to a stage where our principles with the recommendations, guidance, how to implement them, also help to start the next one, where we especially could focus on the work, how to govern European health data space or spaces, and somehow to integrate it with other data spaces. There are not only health, but other ones. And practically that, if you consider that we reformulated our last, originally, Principle 9, and say that we should consider other data spaces as well, it is really interesting, because health is determined not only by health data, but also with non-health data.
Indeed, a lot of things to do, and thanks for that. I would now open for someone from the audience if there's some additional question, and maybe just for 10 seconds waiting. Is there a question right now from the audience to the speaker?
If I may, we have one question from Peter Bachmann in the chat. He writes, according to the European pharmacovigilance legislation, there's a legal obligation to use MIDRA and not SNOMED. Not sure where SNOMED has been mentioned.
It was during the presentation.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And it goes to the direction of it. Number 11 speaks the same language.
Yes,
okay.
I mentioned SNOMED in my speech. It was not written in the presentation, but really I mentioned as an example SNOMED. But the main message is existing standards could be really used to be interoperable. So everybody should select among the existing ones and concentrate on them to be able to share, yeah, on the one hand, machine readable data. What is really important for us.
Can I have a comment to this? Because one of the big problems, both with METRA and SNOMED, is that we need translation into European languages. And it's very nice to speak about machine readable things, but if patients cannot understand, that's a problem. And as a matter of fact, we have in the European Union a multilingual environment.
Yes, it's I fully understand. Even we in Hungary face this problem, not only because Hungarian is a unique language, but practically we had to translate a lot. And this is really covering the problem. If you consider our one of the lots what we have, that we should have finally actions which could help to utilize financial resources in an efficient way. And this is a question if translation would make not really efficient, then we have to consider what kind of standards we use finally.
Okay.
For the time, it seems that translation could be even using such standards could be efficient, even despite we had to pay for translating the standards to our.
Sorry, to answer to this, the problem what we see is not the money, it's the time you need for translation. And there we are speaking about at least 1 to 2 years if you start it, if you have the money.
I now want to give the floor to Alessio and Stefano from Italy, both dealing with the INTEROPEHRATE project, which they will certainly explain in detail, which is a European money-funded project. And Alessio, I guess you are the first. Please feel free to start. Use the next 15 to 20 minutes.
So first of all, I am Alessio Graziani. I work for Ingegneria Informatica, that is a private Italian company. and I'm a technical. My role in the INTEROPEHRATE project is as a senior researcher, and I lead the technical group of one specific communication protocol named R2D. Next slide, please, Stefan. So the INTEROPEHRATE consortium is represented by 7 member states. The project belongs to is a RIA project, and it lasts 42 months. And next slide. The context of the project is the cross-border exchange of health data. So actually, in Europe, there is a project named EHDS-I that is not a research project, is an operational project that is working on the theme of a cross-border health data exchange. The approach is an institutional approach where each member state is represented by an NCP. And this, the exchange of health data happens between this closed and trusted federation of NCPs. And next slide, please, Stefan. In this approach, the citizen is not empowered. The citizen access to an hospital, access to a medical visit abroad, and he's just a passive actor in the EHDS-I from the EHDS-I point of view. There is an ACP that will take care of him. This ACP will ask to patient summary of this patient submitting a request to the Italian NCP, and we'll get back the patient summary, and the ACP will be able to see his data. So the point of view of INTEROPEHRATE is a little bit different, because in INTEROPEHRATE we put the citizen at the center. So the approach is patient-centric. And next slide, Stefan. Thank you. But what I want to stress and to highlight is that we are not competitor of the EHDS-I. There is no competition. We just would like to complement the EHDS-I architecture, supporting always the cross-border exchange of health data, but having the citizen as a central point. And how is this realized in our view? Next slide, Stefan. This is realized because the project will define open specification regarding protocols, exchange data protocols, and exchange data format, allowing the citizen to store health data on his mobile phone. And within INTEROPEHRATE, we called SER, that is Smart EHR. With the name Smart EHR, we mean a family of mobile apps that acts as a personal EHR of the citizen. So in our view, the project will define open specification, while software vendors will adopt this open specification to implement several and different kinds of smart EHR, allowing the citizen to bring with him inside the smartphone his personal data. Starting from this idea, we would like to transform paper into something electronic is stored inside the phone. So this is a slide quite similar to the one that we saw before. The main difference is that the citizen now is at the center of the circle, and the citizen goes abroad in Europe and brings always with him his personal health data. And when he goes abroad to have a visit, he will use the smartphone to exchange data with the doctor using one of the defined communication protocol. Okay, so here with this slide I will introduce to you some names and some concept of the project. So with the name R2D, we mean a family of protocols for the communication between a remote R2D is remote to device, so communication protocol based on internet that allows a smart EHR to download data from an health data repository, for instance, or to backup data on a personal cloud storage. While with the term D2D, we mean device-to-device communication. This is not based on internet, this is based on Bluetooth, and this is the communication protocol used when the patient goes to an hospital to have a visit. So the data goes from the smartphone to the application of the ACP using these short-range communication protocols. And the last word for the research protocol, that is the most significant example of data reuse in INTEROPEHRATE. Let's say that a research center that would like to execute some medical researches may define public research protocols that will be sent to the smartphone of a candidate citizen that are able to provide their consent to share their data for research purposes. Or this scenario will be better explained by Stefano in the next presentation. So this slide is a little bit more complicated, but says exactly the same things of the other. We have a family of protocol named D2D that are applied to a scenario that within the project we call medical visit abroad. All the R2D protocols are the protocols for communication between the smart EHR and remote health data sources. This protocol is applied to a scenario that we call emergency access within the project. And the third family of protocols are the research protocol applied to a scenario that we call the health research scenario within the project. Okay, some final slidings. Okay. What are the INTEROPEHRATE open specification? INTEROPEHRATE open specification are, first of all, 5 profiles for EHR interoperability. These profiles will be some profiles custom-made specifically for the project, while for the international patient summary, we are reusing the international patient summary defined by HL7. And then there are conformance level to specify when a smart EHR may be defined as smart EHR compliant to INTEROPEHRATE conformance level. And then there are the 3 protocols that we named before. So the open specification will obviously define specification of the 3 protocols. Okay. So regarding this specific webinar, we think that the main idea in INTEROPEHRATE that fits with this webinar are the patient empowerment and the sharing of data with the research protocol. And for what concerns the future, there is the next slide where we The next one. Okay, yes, where we obviously need some help from you with the adoption of the specification, with the endorsement of the open specification defined by the project, with the EU certification of software products, and with some EU services regarding official translation and standard terminologies. This is becoming a very huge problem, and as we saw from the questions made before. I leave the word to Stefano.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, EHTEL, for the invitation. My name is Stefano Vermiani. I'm the head of the ICT department of Monastero Foundation, which is a couple of highly specialized hospitals in cardiology and cardiac surgery. And our task in this project is to coordinate somehow. Next slide, please. The scenario definition as both a final user researcher and a physician, and we represent somehow even patients. And the starting point, I'm glad to see that the next webinar will be focused on data quality and semantic, because the starting point here is the semantic catalog, which is available centrally in this federation of research centers that adhere to this network that supports the definition of something that can be shared, that can be collected by the patients and shared with the researcher. We manage both single center study or multicentric studies, and the example here is for multicentric study. We start with one principal investigator, which defines the study, and the definition of the study is based on the items that are present on this central vocabulary that represent information collected, and defines the research protocol just like two items. So the first one is the selection criteria for the patient to be enrolled, and the second one is the data set to be collected and the period of collection from the patient. And then the study is published on this central network that somehow reach the patient phone, and of course, as mentioned before, we are able to collect appropriate consents from the patient. Of course, we will be glad to have a generic European level consent on the patient, but we can assume to have even a single consent for the single specific research. Because in our approach, our focus groups of patient users has pointed out that they are likely to share information for just one study. And then information are checked by the platform component that resides on the patient phone and define if the patient is a candidate. And if the patient is a candidate, the phone asks somehow to the patient if he or she is willing to participate to the research, and of course, hopefully, yes. The consent is transmitted back, and transmitted back to the research principal investigator who have to collect the consent. And then starts the data collection that is performed directly on the phone. And here our approach is just like a wallet or bank approach, because data of research for the researcher are just like money. Would you like to keep your money in your wallet, or would you like to keep your money in your bank? This is the wallet approach, because the citizen directly holds their health related data. This might be seen as just like a direct implementation of Article 20 of GDPR. And then data are collected and then transmitted directly to the reference research center, because we are thinking about a study that can be deployed in different nations, or even in different centers within the same nation, and the patient might prefer to refer to a single center nearby his home instead of another. So there is a direct connection to the reference local research center. And then in a multi-center study, we will have at some period, at least eventually at the end of the study, the collection of any information transmitted by the patient to the research center, even local, directly to the coordinating research center for the final evaluation of the study. So this is a global approach for managing information that stands on few pillars that are a semantic representation of, first of all, of course, the concept of the patient, but even the semantic representation of the information and the use of standards to transmit information that are collected retrospective way or perspective way. So next slide, please. We perform a collection of functionality just based on, this is the initial focus group cycle. We had another one on February, March this year, with different specialties involved and different methodology to conduct research studies. And next slide, please. And of course, we can mention a few results or requests coming from the researcher. But basically, there is something that should be managed, that is the level of anonymization or de-identification that we still have to address, not for some structured information, but for unstructured information, because we manage the PDF report of exam that cannot be easily anonymized. So we have to apply something that is capable to perform a direct, let's say, usage for the researcher. Okay, I think I finished. Next. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Stefano, for this presentation. And of course, thank you, Alessio, for giving us the insight into this quite interesting project. I learned still running 2 years. And we're obviously, and I am at least obviously very curious what's happening in the next 2 years and who's adopting it and who is using it at the end. Although I think that there might be some questions open in the audience. And I don't want to give the floor now to the questions because we have a question and answer sessions in, let's say, 10 minutes. So before that, I want quickly to speed up a little bit and give the floor to Stefan and Luc, who will give us some contributions about the, well, what's happening around in Europe with the EHDS. Stefan, it's your floor, and Luc, it's your floor afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Andreas. Thank you to the other speakers. So this is one of 2 flashlight contributions, indeed, in preparation of the EHDS. And this one touches on broad consent. And I just quickly introduce the idea, which could be instrumental for managing data spaces, since for managing data spaces, it is important that you may not know in advance what will all the purposes data is to be used for. So there must be tools whereby patients stay in control of what happens to their data over the course of time. So, the task is to develop GDPR-conformant so-called data lakes, and to agree on governance models for accessing data and for digital services. So clearly, in the GDPR, there is no use of personal data without consent. And it is important that consent can be withdrawn over time. So a tool for withdrawal has to be implemented. And here the important element is the is here in the second bullet. As a research advances, consent for subsequent steps in the project can be obtained before the next stage begins. So I've started from behind, and this happens when the research purposes cannot be fully specified in advance. So here, that's how this can be implemented. And this is a citation from position that comes from the Article 29 Working Party, where the European Data Protection is convened until a few years ago. This has now been replaced finally for the GDPR. And since this is really just a flashlight, let me just show this use case from Germany. So the Medical Informatics Initiative is a collaboration of all university hospitals in Germany. And they managed over the last years to agree on a core data set. So this would be for semantics, but what we will discuss at the next webinar, which has basic modules and advanced modules. But the important element to mention here is that they have also specified a central access point to this data, which is being collected in so-called data integration centers, which you find here on the bottom of the page. To enable all this work, there has been, in parallel to defining the data sets, there has been comprehensive work on this idea of a broad consent. So this serves indeed the purpose, what has been mentioned, not all future research goals are known at the time the data are captured. And so a first step is that the potential future use of data must be described in a way that the patient can still give a legally valid consent. And such a template has been agreed by the key actors in research in Germany. And after long discussions, it has been approved by the Conference of Independent Data Protection Commissioners in Germany, now in April 2020. And to make this useful for the European debate, and of course also to have international research, this is being translated to English. The translation is nearly ready, but not yet ready for publication. And when you receive the slides, you will be able to click on the links, on the link, and to see this ongoing work at the Medical Informatics Initiative. So this was my flashlight here.
Perfect. Just in time. Thank you. So look, Luc, it's your floor.
The arrival of new technologies of blockchain puts the emphasis a bit somewhere else and say, if we want to speak today about reuse of data, more and more people now emphasizing decentralized models. And I will just show very quickly two proposals made by two companies, but as we've seen, one of them has the support also of a public authority. The first one is a purely private one. And basically their idea is that they want to bring together to a marketplace where they bring data producer, buyer, and plugin providers. Next slide, please. So who are those people? But clearly the data producer can be you and me, but can be devices, can be public databases, existing data lakes. The buyers can be companies, institutions, or any professional in need of data. While the plugin providers are basically making the link between the two. Not only the link, they actually provide the intelligence, the algorithms, whatever is needed in order to process the data and to provide the results that the data analysis buyers want. And here again, we have quite a number of people interested. What they propose in their model is basically that the data stays where it is produced, encrypted, of course, then is selected according to the purpose and the request, of course, of the data buyer. The data are then processed with the plugin in a secure, a trusted, secure environment, then are destroyed, and then the results are being sent to the data buyer. Of course, behind that, there is a market approach and the concept of smart contract based also on the blockchain technology. That's a way to give a global fluidity to the data and to use it. Next slide, please. Just to mention that here, that's the model is proposed for data reuse, but also for use actually for primary use in care, where you need to bring together different stakeholders to take care of the patient. Here, for example, one of the examples they provide is the makeup of a personalized treatment recommendation, which does require to take a number of data from multiple databases in order to bring to the patient a personal recommendation. Next slide, please. The other example is one which is supported by the Estonian eHealth Foundation in partnership with GuardTime. So, and the model is also based on blockchain, with basically the same components, patient consent, FHIR, interoperability framework, and so on. But next slide, please. Here, the system is, the ecosystem is very much more focused on the healthcare system as such, and for the time being, it's limited to a number of use cases. Next slide. What is interesting here is, again, we have this idea that we need to provide an easy tool, and here, a dynamic consent API, as they say, which frees the people from thinking about what the GDPR is about. So basically, this API will provide a predefined set of consent types, associated consent reasons, and would also provide some time limitation. If you need something more complex, the API allows you to configure it the way you want. Next and final slide, please. This, in the Estonian case, they haven't opened this to any kind of use case. One they want to work upon for the time being is quite interesting to see that the first use case is artificial intelligence. So they want to use this model to offer reliability testing of artificial intelligence algorithms before they are used in everyday medicine. So what the focus here is that they want absolutely to be sure to rely on reliable and unbiased data and to control the outputs. But it also can be used to monitor the change in the patient record. And that's what I wanted to propose you to see, that it's not something very futuristic. This is going on now.
Wow, Luke, thank you. To give now the floor to Henrik, who will manage the question and answer session, giving you some things and thoughts where to start with question and answers. And I'm very happy that you're here, Henrik. It's your floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to help steer the final discussion. Just a brief note, I think we have been all working on European Health Data Space even before it was named like that. Even before this current joint action, there has been projects that I think are worth revising and revisiting, such as the Parent project, for example, and even some deliverables from Jason and even eHealth governance initiative. I like this to just quickly say, you know, that in 2009 we sort of have this brand, European Health Data Space. The health is a question. Some people like to call it European Data Space. And it may be relevant for us health people to try to explain why it may or it may not be the case that we need a specific health space, or at least a part of the European space dedicated to health with certain differences that are relevant. And then I think 2020 was the year when it becomes obvious that we need this for specific cross-border services, not digital services, but health services. The COVID crisis, I think now has taught us all what we already knew, at least in digital health and in e-health forums, which was that we need to collaborate broadly in Europe. So, I mean, with this caveat, I think the time is now for the how. And it's important to now go through questions. I mean, there has been a list of 4 questions put on for discussion, but I would suggest that perhaps if there's any burning clarification from previous speakers, I think we can use 1 or 2 minutes for that, and then let's go for one of these, and then I'm going to challenge you on national architectures and what it would be the model to think about next steps, and to make you think about that as we discuss. I think we should look at the EHDS model in terms of allowing countries flexibility to organize internally. However, there are a set of rules for which you need to apply to get recognition and therefore to plug into the network. It may not solve everything. It's definitely easier to share identification, and even that is not easy, but then to share data sets. But still, it's an interesting model. Anyway, over to you for questions from presentations.
Yes, then Enrique, thanks for opening the floor. My question is to Istvan and Martin, and I'm back on this question of governance principle for data reuse. We got an interesting list of principles or of to-dos, and that's great. But I'm trying to put a bit of order in my brain, and in fact trying to understand, to define what should be the headlines, what should be the topics that needs to be addressed in a set of governance principles, just to see whether we are missing some key points or whether we are simply exhaustive. And that's, I would love to hear some from Istvan and Martin, how they see this.
Yeah, let me start with the end, probably what you asked, if something is missing. And if you consider the problems listed in the EU strategy, data strategy, probably you can find one, lack of European data processing and storage solutions. And I dare say that probably this is what is really not touched up to now. I think other problems, other recommendations are very widely assessed and collected, not only in the past week, but the other works what have been done so far by other people who has already recommended things, or ourselves. But despite that there are some recommendations on this issue, we haven't dealt with this. Probably this is because as we are reporting today and proposing for the EHAS network, we felt here some kind of challenge if we can offer something to the EHAS network. Anyways, it might be wise to think over a bit this, because even the EHAS network could recommend something to other bodies regarding this question. And yeah, I think this is. Martin, I don't know if you have anything to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, the question is strong and valid. What we believe is that we started in terms of our work schedule quite in time to open this up to as wide of the stakeholder public as possible. That's why we are here today as well, to challenge you with the question, and then my question would go back that do you feel anything is missing? Because we are more than welcome to include. We have about roughly a year to go. Obviously, we have to be a bit more earlier ready with the final document so that it can go to the May-June ES network meeting in 1 year. But we are really dedicated to run it on as wide basis as possible. And then we will try, obviously, we cannot know, but we will try to have a face-to-face work session somewhere during autumn as well, maybe around the German presidency. We'll see how we can deal with this. And then we are, as I just can only repeat, we are really, really open for further burning issues to be brought to the attention of the working group.
Right, so people can suggest things over to you by email. Thank you very much for that answers. I guess now maybe asking everyone, does anyone want to, just provocative one for the first purposes, should we continue the focus on research, which was the sort of somehow the mantra for the European health data space, or now with COVID, should we quickly make our changes and start focusing on talking about public health data sharing more intensively to get the traction that we now have from governments and even from the European Commission on public health data sharing? This is the question for anyone to sort of launch the debate on first point purposes, and maybe how to define these purposes and who can, in a way, in what bodies could, in a way, not decide but influence what purposes we should focus first as we build the European data space.
If I may add an observation here, actually the when I go now through the streets right now here, everything is full with a large screen advertisement for the German Corona app. So I think we are currently really seeing a very huge experimentation in data altruism, and you can hardly deny of becoming a part of this. So there's really a strong driver.
Thanks. Any further suggestions, comments? No. Basically, the question is, should we hit the hype of the public health moment that will be there for at least 1-2 years, or should we keep the focus on the clients we've had for a long time, which are research collaborations, research networks that have pleaded for data access cross-border for a very long time?
Hello, this is Markus Kalla from the Finnish Innovation Fund. Can I comment to that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thanks, Henrik. I think this is also a question regarding the budget, and when we see the fourth health program budget being proposed more than 9 billion euros, I think there's space to do more action than what we have been able to do in a European wide so far. So I think we should also ride with the hype in some cases and prepare for the next epidemic. I think if we don't have better answers when the next epidemic comes, then people will claim the Commission and the European Union of having a big health budget that has been prepared. So I think we sort of need to ride with the hype and act on that. But I would not forget the clients that we have had for years, as we have a bigger budget that we can take care of all of those. But I think one of the priorities would be to be able to answer to the next crisis better than we have done it so far.
Thanks. Anyone else on this topic? I saw a few people have provided answers on the chat, so those will be taken into account as we prepare the information from today's webinar. So maybe I think I will I will jump to the fourth one for now and actually get hold of this idea of the pan-European health data consent and basically ask the floor if you think we could get to a point where we have a sort of a guideline approved in the ELO Network for the sort of multi-purpose health secondary use consent. Do you think this is a viable thing? This is something you could recommend or at least strive for? Even if we don't get there, we'll get somewhere different. But just to ask you, what do you feel about this? Would this be a purposeful exercise?
Yeah, this is Tapani Piha from Finland. I think that definitely the purpose and the aim is worthwhile, but it definitely will be not an easy way because, and here we really need to work with the stakeholders outside of the normal health sector. We need to work with the data protection people, but at the same time, my experience with data protection people is that when things are well justified and they are reasonable, they can be done. So I think that it's worth aiming at the same time, having in mind that it may not be the easiest thing in the world. Over to you.
Yeah. Comments on this one?
So we had mentioned in the past that we need some independent control mechanisms to make sure that repurposing continues in the right path. And our concern was mainly when we have biobanks and we use artificial intelligence. Sometimes with a click of a button, we change the purpose of collection. And so for us, it's important that we have somehow for us to operationalize the use of this data in a correct way to have these independent review boards.
No, Sarah, if I understand where you're coming from, it seems to me you're saying multi-purpose is interesting, but at some point we need to make sure that we don't off track from what was the communicated purpose and to somehow be doing completely different things with the data. And how, question again, all to all, how does into these models that have been presented today, where case by case, so researcher per researcher, I as a patient am contacted to give my authorization. How do you see the balance between those two models? Sort of trust you, do it all kind of model, and a sort of a case by case model, and what advantages?
There was this interesting, if I can still add on that, there was this interesting presentation about the Interop app and the fact that you can have some kind of control in your own mobile phone. So maybe that can be an easy way where you can have access to the information and you know who is going to have access, to whom you will give authorization to, and what is my level of collection and the entities that could have access to this, and also what kind of inferred data this can be done, and if I always can delete the data. So it's important when you have that the patient has the control over the data. Of course, there needs to be a distinction on the data that the doctor will eventually need when they are for diagnosis and for treatment purposes. But when it is for health research and for public health reasons, then there needs to be some more control by the patient.
Yeah. Anyone arguing for lesser patient intervention system and a sort of more trusted system where institutions, state institutions, would run these data management processes? Okay, so now a final question to trigger the debate. It seems to me we will have the third seminar, and I think this has been identified as an issue. I would like to challenge, however, another idea to everyone, which is national mapping of the data. The question I have is, do countries know, and do they have a repository of what data sets they really have, and what can they share? So in order to be ready to share data, we need to know what we have and what does it look like. The question is, do you think we have the standards, and eventually could we need to make guidelines and define recommendations at the eHealth network level or EU level for characterizing the data banks, characterizing the data sets? We need more work on standardization. Do we need just to agree on certain standards for describing what's called metadata, describing the data we have in each country?
Enrique, if I remember well, some years ago, there has been a study on data repositories that exist in different places across Europe. It was led by Jeremy Thorpe in the past. So is this not the basis for this kind of question, for answering this kind of question?
Yeah, I think it would be. Honestly, I don't know that study very well. I only know the parent study. I think they were also involved in that. My feeling is there's a lot of other data we need for health space that is not the traditional repository data. Most of the repository data have been data about disease. So lists of diseases or patient registries. The question I give back to everyone is whether, in order to really build interesting personalized solutions and even public health solutions, do we not need other types of data, especially hospital located, primary care located, which have not been traditionally labeled as patient repositories or even curated as such? I don't know if I'm making myself clear. So an example for all of us is, what do we have at primary care in Europe? Do we have the same level of the diagnosis, the same level of, for example, tobacco use, and so on? How are our databases on that space? My impression is there's a lot of heterogeneity. Some countries have aggregated their primary care data into national databases, whereas others remain with scattered primary care data. Primary care data is very, very important, possibly more important than what is called tertiary care data, so large, small data sets for rare diseases, if you're doing population data analytics or public health analytics. But anyway, any final questions, comments? We only have 1 more minute for.
If you allow a very quick point, I think what you just proposed is indeed a very valuable point to move forward. And I think by discussing on health-related issues, it's often the case that we simply see these picture divided in 2 parts. It's just the, let's say, the national type health systems and the insurance-based health systems. And if you discuss then the data, it's often clear that there are 2 very different perspectives. So alone, let's say, mapping those 2 worlds in terms of a common data mapping, a common data model, would already be a very nice start for this metadata exercise that you have mentioned. That's my idea here.
Well, if I just may a final note also, Enrique, is that based on my experience, just getting to know what's available, and I don't even speak at European level, at national level is already quite a challenge. I mean, we've done the exercise, just making an inventory of the lakes, the so-called registries or whatsoever, is a work. Then trying to see which metadata are used to index those data within each register is another challenge. Then converging, having a convergence strategy in order to map those registers and to actually enable the use of the data embedded in those registers is again another challenge. So even for existing lakes, basically there is a lot to do in order to make those data usable and actionable. So I fully agree with you. Actually, we need to use better all those data because it goes back quite a number of years. So there is a richness and there is knowledge there that we must better use. But clearly the point here today is to better directly use now the data produced at the point of care. And we need to follow those two parallel ways. So better using the existing lakes and having a strategy now for much more fluent and reuse of data produced at the point of care level without several intermediaries.
Yeah, Vesa here, just to intervene a little bit, because in the chat there was raised a question around real-world data and evidence for market access or kind of post-launch activities, something like which you may call also post-market surveillance. So I think that raises a nice way the area of effectiveness. So what does it mean that when we intervene people or populations, what kind of results we get actually in common societal context? And that could be one piece for the public health research, maybe AI also as your number one on the list.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much all for participating in this brief debate and discussion, and over to the closure.
Conclude about the webinar here. We started with István Zismadia's governance principles, and I bought the very idea of building up trust, and especially that the trust is built through actions. And István also had the rules and habits and resources questions, but I think first and foremost the building up and keeping the trust would be of value from here to eternity, I guess. Then we had the two gentlemen from Italy talking about the 16 partners interop EHDS-Architectures type of issue, where the focus is cross-border exchange of health data. And I found that F-hire profiles, I think they will be used for the EHR interoperability as a solution. And I also want to point out that there were the very idea of open specifications for everybody. Then we went on to the consent management and the presentation of Stefan Schuk, and I found out that yes, you have to say that there's no consent management if there's no and it's of no use without the consent. And especially you have to build also the implementation of withdrawal to these activities we have been allowing. And the broad consent issue is very interesting one, but maybe not yet for the production. Luke Nicola brought up very, very nicely the concept of data producers, buyers, and providers, and provided a nice example of the use of blockchains in our neighboring Estonia. And he also brought the idea of dynamic consent API. And in this interactive question and answer session by Enrique, I wrote a couple of notes about the shift in purposes from data space or spaces towards the public health or something like that. And I oppose a little bit because I come from Finland, which is a country with thousands of lakes, and we like these lakes or data spaces. That's why. And I still bring up the issue about the effectiveness, the real world data and effectiveness as a kind of unifying concept for these interoperable activities. Perhaps is it Stefan and Mark, you are going to introduce the next steps of upcoming webinars?
Okay, thank you very much, Vesa, for this nice conclusions, and extremely welcome for this picture of the many thousand lakes in Finland to keep a little bit the heterogeneity in the domain. We had already mentioned in the chat that there will be a third meeting in this series of ELO virtual meetings. And the next one will focus on regulations for better data sharing and data reuse. And this will be on semantics and mapping. Luc has made some points in the chat box. And going from behind to the middle, we'll also have in September a second webinar of the Digital Integrated Care Task Force, dealing with health data ecosystems for integrated care, which is a nice opportunity to learn even more on governance. And as well, the EHTEL Innovation Initiative will organize a webinar in their work on digital therapeutics and interacting with human beings. All this is to be announced on the EHTEL website. You see here the two links below, where you on one hand see the Imagining 2029 page, and the documentation and recordings you find under the webinars in activities. And looking this up, you will see that there are already some full recordings of the earlier webinars to be reviewed, supported also by presentations. So here is, not sure who wants to say something more, Andreas, Mark?
Last point on my side. We will send to, so thank you to everybody for your participation and for having listened, and we will send you in the course of the afternoon a kind of evaluation form with also a few questions to get a bit more feedback from you, not only on the way the webinar has been organized, but also on the content, so that we can further develop the program of Imagining 2019 with you. So that's something, watch your mailbox, and you will receive emails from us on this. Thanks a lot.
Okay, then I would guess that's it for this meeting. And I would say thank you for everybody for joining. Thank you for being here. Thank you that you have joined us, gave us questions, some insights, and hopefully we will meet again in September, October. We keep you on stage and we keep you informed when it will happen. Thank you, and well, have a nice break and have a nice week and have a nice summertime.